Okay, wow. This deep dive request you sent is, it's a big one.
It is, yeah.
We're tackling Chapter 7.
Ethics in health and human well-being, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, we're going to be wading into some pretty serious ethical dilemmas.
That's right, from medical bioethics all the way to mental health and trauma.
And you've given us some really interesting and diverse sources.
Yeah, well, I wanted to make sure we were looking at it from all angles,
Absolutely.
They have academic chapters, we have policy papers, we've even got some opinion pieces in here.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive set of materials for us to really understand these complex issues.
So I guess the question is, where do we even begin? I mean, ethics in health and human well-being, that's pretty broad.
Yeah, well, let's start with something fundamental to all this. Healthcare access and equity.
Okay.
It seems like everybody these days is talking about a right to healthcare.
Right.
But the real ethical battlefield is how to actually make that right a reality for everyone.
Yeah, because it's easy to say everyone deserves healthcare. But when you actually start to think about it, you run into all these problems.
Absolutely.
Like limited resources and different needs and, a lot of moral gray areas.
Exactly. And that's where those ethical frameworks that we've been given come in.
Okay.
Like utilitarianism and egalitarianism. Remember those from the chapter?
Yeah, kind of. Remind me again how those two work, because they always seem to be butting heads.
Well, utilitarianism, that's all about aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
Right.
So if we're thinking about healthcare, a utilitarian approach might say, okay, let's put our resources towards preventing common diseases.
Okay.
Even if it means we can't fund as much research for rare conditions.
So it's about maximizing overall well-being.
Right, but some individuals might benefit more than others.
I mean, that makes sense, but it also seems kind of cold.
What do you mean?
Like, what about those individuals who, I don't know, might get left behind in that calculation?
And that is the exact argument that egalitarianism makes. It basically says, no, everyone should have equal access to healthcare no matter what.
Okay.
Regardless of their condition, their circumstances, everybody's got the same right to a healthy life.
So if somebody has a really rare disease, egalitarianism would say, even if the treatment is super expensive and it only helps a few people, those people deserve the same access to care as anybody else.
Exactly.
So then it's like this constant tug of war.
Right, and that's the heart of the ethical struggle.
Between the needs of the many.
And the rights of the individual.
Do we put cost effectiveness first?
Or do we prioritize equal access?
Yeah, those aren't easy questions to answer.
Not at all, and this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate either.
I mean, I'm already rethinking a lot of what I thought was fair in healthcare.
Right, because it's playing out in real-world policies all the time.
Give me an example.
Think about organ transplantation.
Okay.
Do we give those organs to the people who are most likely to benefit, to maximize what we can do with a limited resource?
That makes sense.
Or do we create a lottery system to make sure that everyone has an equal chance?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful example.
It is, and it really highlights the real-world consequences of these different ethical frameworks.
Yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the ethics of healthcare access, isn't it?
It really is, but before we get too deep into the weeds there,
Okay.
I think it's worth looking at another area that you've flagged in your sources.
Okay, which one?
Genetic engineering, cloning, and reproductive ethics.
Ooh, yeah, okay. Now this is where things get really futuristic and, to be honest, a little scary.
In what way?
Well, I mean, the potential of gene editing, like with CRISPR to cure diseases, that's incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
But I just can't help but think about, designer babies and all the ethical problems that might come with that.
Yeah, and your concerns are shared by a lot of people.
Okay.
That's actually why we have things like the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights.
I remember reading a bit about that, but it was pretty dense.
It is, it can be.
What's the main takeaway for someone who's not, a bioethicist or something?
Basically, it says we need to be developing and using these powerful technologies responsibly, keeping human dignity front and center.
So, it's about making sure these advancements actually benefit all of humanity.
Exactly, not just a select few.
Right, and that they don't just make existing inequalities worse.
Right, it's like we're drawing these ethical lines in the sand before we get too carried away.
Before we go too far.
With all this new power we have over our own biology.
Because what would happen if only rich people could afford gene editing?
That's a great point.
Like, to get rid of diseases or enhance themselves.
Yeah, we could end up with a whole new level of genetic stratification.
Indiscrimination.
Right, that declaration, it's trying to prevent those dystopian scenarios.
So We almost need like a whole new set of ethical rules for this new world of genetic engineering.
We do, but even with guidelines, it's still so murky, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Like, where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? Those are big questions that, honestly, I'm kind of scared of.
I get that.
But I'm glad that we're having these conversations now,
Absolutely.
before it's too late.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, but we've got to face these things head on
We do.
with open discussion and careful consideration.
From all sides.
And a strong ethical compass, we can hopefully navigate all this responsibly.
You've given me a lot to think about, and
Huh?
we haven't even talked about mental health and trauma yet,
Oh, that's right.
which, based on what you sent me, seems like a whole other ethical minefield.
It is, but it's also where the need for ethics is probably the most urgent.
Why is that?
Well, we're dealing with the very core of the human experience. Our minds, our emotions, our ability to heal from some really deep hurt.
All right, well, lead the way. I'm ready to jump into this next chapter, and I have a feeling it's going to get even more intense.
Yeah, let's focus on one aspect of mental health that you highlighted,
Okay.
addressing collective trauma from gender-based violence.
Okay, I'm all ears. This is something I'm very passionate about, so I'm really interested to hear your take on it.
It's a topic that needs both empathy and a lot of ethical consideration.
Okay.
Collective trauma from gender-based violence, it recognizes those shared psychological wounds.
That go through communities and even whole societies.
Exactly, often because of very deep cultural norms and systemic inequalities.
It's just heartbreaking how, in some cultures, violence against women and girls is, it's like it's normal.
It is, yeah.
Or even just dismissed.
Right.
Feels like a huge betrayal of human dignity.
It is, and that's exactly why we need to address this kind of collective trauma.
But that's got to be really hard to do.
It is, it's tricky.
I mean, you can't just walk into another culture and say, hey, your values are wrong, even if you're trying to stop violence.
No, absolutely not. It's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah.
One approach that's become more common is trauma-informed care.
Okay, what is that?
It's all about recognizing how deeply trauma can affect people and communities, and then tailoring your interventions accordingly.
So it's not just about like therapy, but also understanding the root causes of the trauma
Exactly.
and the cultural context.
Right, because those things affect healing and recovery.
Yeah, because in some cultures, maybe traditional healing practices would be more effective than like Western therapy.
Exactly. A trauma-informed approach, it respects those differences and tries to integrate them.
It's about meeting people where they are,
Right.
culturally and emotionally.
Yeah, instead of forcing a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly.
And when we talk about this collective trauma from gender-based violence,
Okay.
it's not just about helping survivors.
It's also about addressing what's causing the violence in the first place.
Exactly, like challenging those harmful cultural norms.
Promoting gender equality.
Absolutely.
Treating safe spaces for women and girls.
Right. It's about dismantling those systemic problems that are keeping the violence going.
And creating a society where everybody feels safe and respected and empowered.
Absolutely.
That's a huge task.
It-
But it's a fight worth having.
It is.
And I'm glad that you're bringing up all these ethical issues because
right.
it's not always a simple path to justice.
No, it's not.
Speaking of nuance, there's another ethically tricky area within mental health.
What's that?
Consent and autonomy in mental health care.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really difficult.
Yeah.
Because now we're dealing with people whose ability to make decisions might be messed up because of their condition.
Right. Like you want to respect everyone's right to choose their own treatment.
Absolutely.
But what if someone's mental illness keeps them from really understanding what those choices mean?
That's the dilemma.
Yeah.
How do we balance respecting autonomy with the need to care for and protect people who might be vulnerable because of their mental state?
It's a tightrope walk, that's for sure.
It is.
And I bet mental health professionals are dealing with this all the time.
They are.
I mean, there's no easy answer.
Right. It comes down to a really careful assessment of the individual.
Like whether they can make informed decisions.
Exactly. The potential risks and benefits of the treatment.
And what the laws are about mental health care in that place.
Right. It's not just about medical expertise.
There's also ethical judgment and legal stuff, too.
Yeah, and the stakes are really high.
It makes me think about those stories you hear sometimes.
About what?
About people with really serious mental illnesses who refuse treatment and something terrible happens.
Right. Those are the cases that remind us why we need to be talking about this.
Yeah.
We need to keep having these conversations to help people understand.
Mental health and the ethical challenges.
Exactly.
It's not easy to talk about.
But it's so important.
Especially because as we keep making advancements in neuroscience and mental health treatment.
It's just going to get more complicated.
It is, yeah.
We need to be ready to handle all that with compassion and with ethical principles.
You've given me a lot to think about, for sure.
Good. Good.
My head's spinning a little.
It's okay.
But it's really thought-provoking, and I feel like I'm understanding these issues so much better.
That's great to hear. We've only just scratched the surface, though.
Wait, there's more.
There is.
I'm both excited and terrified to see what other ethical stuff we'll find in this deep dive.
Well, let's take a breather for a moment, gather our thoughts, and then we'll get ready for the next leg of our journey.
Oh,
We've
wow.
still got so much to explore.
We do.
So, picking up where we left off, let's dig deeper into the ethics of mental health.
Okay.
Specifically, the idea of consent and autonomy.
Yeah, that really stood out to me from our earlier talk.
Oh, how so?
Well, the fact that someone's mental state can actually affect their ability to make good decisions about their treatment,
Right.
it's fascinating. But it's also a huge ethical challenge.
It is, for sure. We're talking about the balance between individual autonomy and making sure vulnerable people are taken care of.
Right, because on the one hand, you want everyone to be able to choose their own path to healing.
Yeah.
But what happens when their mental health is actually preventing them from seeing what's best for them?
Exactly. And that's the tightrope that mental health professionals have to walk every day.
I bet. So how do they actually navigate that? How do they make those tough decisions?
Well, there's no magic formula. Every situation is different.
Right.
You have to consider the individual's diagnosis,
Okay.
how capable they are of making decisions at that moment,
Right.
what the risks and benefits of different treatments are,
Yeah.
and even the legal framework for mental health care in their area.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is, and that's why we rely on the expertise of mental health professionals
us.
to guide us, but also to act ethically.
And following the law.
Absolutely. What are some ethical principles that come to mind for you?
Well, I guess one of the most important is making sure the patient's best interests are at heart.
Beneficence, yeah.
That's it. But doesn't that sometimes clash with the idea of autonomy?
It can, and those are the toughest situations.
Like when someone needs treatment but refuses it.
Yeah. Sometimes a person's mental health makes them so unable to make informed choices.
That stepping in is the only ethical option
Right. Even if it goes against what they're saying they want in that moment.
because their safety, or even the safety of others, is at stake.
Exactly. It's about finding that delicate balance.
Yeah, respecting their right to self-determination,
Right.
but also stepping in when their mental state might be a real danger.
It's not easy.
Not at all. That's why having these discussions is so important.
Yeah, we need to help people understand mental health better.
And the ethical challenges that come with it.
Absolutely, especially as we keep advancing in neuroscience and mental health treatments.
It's just going to keep getting more complicated.
It is, yeah.
Which is kind of scary, honestly.
I understand, but we need to be ready to face these new challenges
Head on.
with both compassion and a strong sense of what's right.
Okay, well, you've definitely given me a lot to think about when it comes to the ethics of mental health care.
Good.
It's a heavy topic, but also really important.
It is, both on a personal level and for society as a whole.
And like you said, there are no simple answers.
That's true for a lot of ethical dilemmas, especially when it comes to health and well-being.
Right, but even just thinking about these questions, trying to understand the different viewpoints.
That's a step in the right direction.
It is. So what's next? What other ethical territory are we going to explore?
Let's go back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
The idea of collective trauma, remember?
Yeah, I do. And I'm really interested in that, especially when it comes to gender-based violence.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to me, the fact that whole communities can be affected by this kind of trauma,
Right.
especially when it's rooted in these deep societal inequalities, it feels like a huge violation of human dignity.
Absolutely, and addressing this form of collective trauma ethically and effectively is so important.
But how do you even begin to do that? I mean, it seems incredibly complex.
It is, and we have to be so careful about respecting different cultures.
And empowering communities to heal and rebuild.
Exactly. You can't just come in with a Western approach to trauma and expect it to work everywhere.
No, it's got to be tailored to the specific cultural context
Yeah.
and the history of that community.
Exactly, and sensitive to the support systems that are already in place.
So it's about listening to those communities,
Yeah.
learning from their experiences,
Absolutely.
and working together to figure out what will actually promote healing and resilience.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that addressing this kind of collective trauma.
It takes a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. It's not just about therapy.
Right. It's about changing the systems that are allowing this violence to happen in the first place.
Things like harmful gender norms.
Right. And economic empowerment for women and girls.
Absolutely. Access to education and healthcare.
Creating a society where women and girls feel safe, valued, and empowered.
Yeah, that's the goal.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is.
But it's absolutely necessary.
It is, and we need to be mindful of the ethical considerations every step of the way.
It's not just about good intentions.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the nuances,
Right.
the cultural context,
Yeah.
and what the long-term impacts of our actions will be.
Well said, and that brings us to another key part of addressing collective trauma.
Okay, what's that?
Truth and reconciliation.
That rings a bell.
Like what happened in South Africa after apartheid?
Yeah, exactly.
It's been used in a lot of situations where there's been collective trauma.
So it's about acknowledging what happened.
Yeah, the truth has to be out in the open,
So people can start to heal
and those who were harmed have a chance to tell their stories.
and seek justice.
Exactly.
So in the context of gender-based violence,
It might mean publicly admitting that this type of violence is a problem in the community.
holding perpetrators accountable,
Yeah, through the legal system or community-based justice.
supporting survivors who want to share their stories.
Absolutely. And challenging the norms and beliefs that make this violence possible.
It sounds like a long and difficult process.
Yeah.
But if we want to end this cycle of violence
It's a necessary process.
and create a more just society,
Absolutely. It requires a commitment to ethics.
cultural sensitivity,
Yes, and a willingness to face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
it's not easy, but it's important work.
It is, and I appreciate you shining a light on all the complexities and ethical considerations.
Well, thank you for taking us through all this. It's been really eye-opening.
It's been my pleasure, but let's take another break to gather our thoughts.
Okay.
We still have a lot to cover,
We do.
from putting these ethical ideas into practice to the ongoing debates about the future of health and well-being.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From healthcare resources to consent and mental health care and even collective trauma, it's been a lot to take in.
It has been a very comprehensive exploration. You've really delved into some crucial yet very difficult topics. It's clear you're really trying to grasp not just the information, but the ethical side of health and human well-being.
I am, and I have to admit, it's been a bit overwhelming at times. We've seen so many layers of complexity, so many situations where there's no easy answer.
That's the thing about ethics, especially when we're talking about issues as complex as health and human well-being. It's rarely black and white. It's about figuring out how to make tough decisions when things are uncertain and there are competing values at play.
So where do we go from here? How do we use all these insights, all these frameworks and dilemmas in our own lives?
That's the big question. And while I can't give you a step-by-step guide to ethical decision-making, I think the key takeaway from our deep dive is the importance of developing something we could call ethical awareness.
Ethical awareness. I like that, but what does that actually mean?
It means being more sensitive to the ethical side of our choices, both big and small. It means taking a pause to consider not just what's legal or efficient, but what's the right thing to do, what aligns with our values and what impact our actions might have on others, not just now, but in the future.
So it's about being more mindful, more intentional in our choices, questioning the way things are, and challenging our own assumptions about what's right and wrong.
Exactly. It's about making ethics a part of how we make decisions every day. Whether it's choosing a doctor, supporting a new law, or talking about sensitive issues like mental health or gender-based violence.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you give me some examples of what that might look
Right.
like in real life?
Sure. Let's go back to healthcare. We talked about the challenges of allocating resources and making sure everyone has access to care. But on a personal level, being ethically aware could mean taking the time to learn about the medications you're taking, not just how effective they are, but also their side effects, their impact on the environment, and how they were made. Or it could mean supporting policies that make healthcare more affordable for everyone, recognizing that our own health is connected to the health of our communities.
So taking responsibility for our own choices while also working towards a better healthcare system for all.
And we can apply this ethical lens to so many other parts of our lives. Think about all the technology we use. Ethical awareness might lead you to question the privacy policies of social media companies, to choose products from businesses that prioritize ethical sourcing and fair labor practices, or just to be more mindful of how what you do online impacts others.
It's about being a conscious consumer, not just of products, but of information and how we use technology.
Exactly. And then there are our relationships with other people. Ethical awareness might encourage you to challenge a joke or comment that's discriminatory, to stand up for someone who's being treated unfairly, or simply to listen with empathy and understanding to someone whose experiences are different from your own.
It's about recognizing that every person has value and deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter their background or beliefs.
Beautifully said. And of course, we can't forget our responsibilities to the planet. Ethical awareness might lead you to make choices that are better for the environment, like reducing your carbon footprint or supporting policies that protect nature for future generations.
It's realizing that our actions have consequences, that even small choices can make a difference, that we can help create a world that's more just, more compassionate, and more sustainable.
Absolutely. Developing ethical awareness isn't about being morally perfect. It's about being more mindful, more thoughtful, and more committed to living by your values.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I feel like I have a new understanding of the ethical challenges we face and a new set of tools to navigate those challenges. But this feels like just the beginning of a much longer journey.
It is. Ethical awareness isn't a destination. It's a journey of reflection, discussion, and engagement with the world around us. It's about constantly striving to be more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more responsible.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this exploration. It's been really eye-opening and empowering.
The pleasure has been all mine. And just remember, the most important step is simply to start asking questions, to have those tough conversations, and to make a conscious effort to live by your values. Even the smallest acts of ethical awareness can make a difference and help create a more just and compassionate world for everyone.